TikTok attracts around 1 billion users a month. That's a huge audience and a lot of potential voters. But with disinformation a real problem and concerns mounting over cybersecurity, what role will TikTok play in this record year of elections? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, US President Joe Biden has signed a law which gives TikTok's Chinese owner, ByteDance, 9 months to sell the social media platform. If it doesn't, it will be blocked in the US. American policymakers fear Chinese interference in upcoming elections. The company insists data on the social media platform is safe. So, are concerns over TikTok justified? Or has it just become a political football?
President Biden's attempt to appeal to a younger audience. His first TikTok video has over 10 million views. Others have been published following the House vote to either ban TikTok in the US or sell the American part of the company.
TikTok is a threat to our national security because it is owned by ByteDance, which does the bidding of the Chinese Communist Party. We know this because ByteDance leadership says so, and because Chinese law requires it.
TikTok has always denied it gives or would give American data to the Chinese Communist Party. And China was quick to call out American hypocrisy.
It is truly ironic that the US itself, a country that prides itself on freedom of speech and claims to be a free market economy, uses state power to suppress a specific company.
The reality is TikTok is extremely popular among young people. More than 2/3 of users are below the age of 34. While some politicians have TikTok accounts, the main American parties do not. The platform prohibits political advertising outright, so paid-for election ads are not allowed. When you look at who actually votes in US elections, under 30s are the least likely age group to actually cast their ballot. The 2024 presidential election is likely going to be a rerun of 2020 between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. But 4 years on, political malaise is on the rise. So what role will TikTok play in swaying voter sentiment, positive or negative? And will that translate into younger people turning up to polling stations?
Let's meet our guests. Joining us from Suffolk in the UK is Peter Warren. He is the chairperson of the Cybersecurity Research Institute. Here in the studio with me, I'm delighted to say, is Mariah Al-Idrissi. She's a model and content creator with over 100,000 followers on Instagram. Marianne Russon is a multimedia journalist who writes about technology issues, and Bill Mew is a privacy campaigner and global cyber ambassador for the International Association of Risk and Crisis Communications. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Peter, I'll come to you first. Is TikTok really a threat to American democracy?
I think the issue here is that lots and lots of companies are a threat to democracy in one way or another just because of the amount of information that they're gathering. The Chinese have been gathering information for ever such a long time. There are a lot of inimicable countries that are storing information against possibly being able to break through the encryption that protects it. So the problem is that people are beginning to find their way in technology, and they're trying to put, I suppose, are now being called guardrails in place about the use of data. That's the big worry about all of this.
And tell me, Bill, do you think the Americans are right to be concerned here, or is this kind of like paranoia stroke xenophobia that it's a Chinese company that's doing so well in the Western world?
I think the Americans are right to actually have concerns about social media from two particular perspectives. One, the social media harms, the cyberbullying, a lot of the effect that it has on the psychology, especially of young people. And the other one is obviously the information tracking and the sort of mass surveillance. But coming from a European sat between these two superpowers, we find it somewhat hypocritical of the Americans to be pointing fingers at the Chinese when And to a large extent, most of the social media harms are being carried out by American companies. And actually, when it comes to mass surveillance, the masters of mass surveillance are the NSA in the US, who trail almost all our information. So there's a certain amount of hypocrisy in what the Americans are saying. They're not wrong to have concerns about social media and mass surveillance, but maybe they should get their own act in order and sort of actually try and regulate their own systems.
Marianne, I want to come to you. Just no one ever says that you shouldn't buy an Apple Watch or an Apple phone because the American government might get your data. And yet that's all you seem to hear about, whether it's Huawei and their tech or TikTok. Anything to do with the Chinese government, basically, the West doesn't trust. Is that a fair assessment?
I would say that seems to be a fair assessment. I mean, I can only tell you from a tech point of view. I mean, the big issue they're saying in the tech is about where the data is. Is the data being sent back to servers in China? And so what TikTok says is we have servers located in Singapore, which is in Southeast Asia, but it's not China, in Malaysia, and in the US. And they're now moving more servers to Texas. So they're basically trying to say, look, we're trying to store the data offshore. However, what Chinese companies have always said is they've always tried to say that just because data is stored in China doesn't necessarily mean it's free for all for the Chinese Communist Party. So therefore, that is the issue really, is that really the case? Of course, I would love to be a fly on the wall. I don't know for certain. I do know that if you are a Chinese business in China, you need to be au fait with the Chinese Communist Party. Otherwise, you can't have a business.
But that's what the inference is, isn't it?
Yeah,
the inference
that's the
is that the data goes to Beijing and the government have got it and,
But I think if you were to look at what TikTok's actually doing, I think what they're saying is actually true. Their stuff is located in servers all over the world. However, we could say the same argument again about US companies and where we store that data, which is why many countries are now talking about, particularly governments, are talking about something called the sovereign cloud. So it's the idea that we will all have our own data centers and you would store all the crucial information about each country's citizens within their own borders.
Maria, you obviously are hugely involved in social media and you've really made it work. You've got a lot of followers. Why are so many people on TikTok, young people in particular?
Do you know what's interesting? TikTok's probably the app that I use the least, just because maybe I've hit my 30s now and I find it all overwhelming. So I try to focus on Instagram. But I think with TikTok, it is simply because it's just easy to use. I mean, there's not that much to it. Initially, it wasn't so much about the ads and the promotion, which was the route that Instagram is leaning towards. So I think people looked at TikTok as a way to just have pure entertainment and for some, education where it's just about scrolling. But now they've obviously incorporated, all these paid promotional ads and stuff. I don't know how that's going to change. It just feels like everywhere's a marketing app now rather than just, a breath of fresh air.
My son is 15 and I notice he gets a lot of his news from TikTok. So it's a powerful mechanism.
It is. And I think a lot of people have this concern, of misinformation when it comes to TikTok. But then, as you said, the same thing is across all social media. I mean, we can't pinpoint TikTok just being the only place where there's misinformation. We just have to, I think, balance,
It is extremely popular. Let's take a look at where their users are worldwide by country. So countries with the largest TikTok audience as of January this year: United States, 148 million. Indonesia, 126.8 million users. Brazil, 98.6 million. Mexico, 74.2 million. Vietnam, 67.7 million. Russia, 58.6 million. I mean, that is a big audience, 148 million, Bill, in the United States. If TikTok were to lose its foothold in the United States, I mean, that's quite a setback.
Well, we're talking here not necessarily about TikTok losing its foothold. We may find that it's spun off, it's sold, and that's after we've been potentially through a number of rounds of appeal, because there's a large legal system to fight our way through. The concern here is that, is a ban actually the right move to make? Couldn't we actually put in some more sensible provisions that would actually achieve what we're trying to do in terms of protection, certainly for children, which have been identified as one of the most vulnerable communities? things. And it's certainly possible to age-gate these type of platforms. And nominally, most of the platforms say that they don't allow users to go onto their platforms unless they've reached the age of 13. But research has shown that we have 5, 7-year-olds with social media accounts, and that this is rife because they don't do the checks. Now, Australia has introduced a sort of curb on anonymity in order to ensure that they're able to do these checks. And if they can do it, then anyone else can. I mean, we're not going to allow children to drive cars at the age of 10 or smoke or drink. And we have movies that are graduated between different age groups. We need to think in the same way that there are potential social harms here from social media, and possibly, and I would advocate, an age limit of 15 rather than 13, and having curbs on anonymity so that we can enforce this sort of control in terms of age gating.
Well, Peter, it's not just TikTok that's playing an important role as we have so many elections worldwide this year. Meta has 3 billion users across its platforms, which are WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram. And in the last year and a half, Meta have cut down on their staff, reducing the teams that keep misinformation and hate speech off their platforms. Do you think we should be worried about the influence of platforms like TikTok in this huge global election year?
I think we should be worried about any platforms in this global election year, because it's not actually the platforms per se, it's people's ability to be able to manipulate those platforms. You've got lots and lots of people who are incredibly intelligent in terms of the way that they're putting disinformation out. So, and they're thinking about the ways that they can put disinformation out at this very moment. I think one of the things that we're not really thinking about, and it was the point that one of the panelists did pick up, is this notion of territoriality of information and wanting to have information in particular servers within your own domains and to be able to have some control over that. I know that people will say that with AI that you make multiple copies of data everywhere, but as Bill says, at some point, you do have the ability to control things. We are going to increasingly have to use technology to do that. So to go to your point about people being laid off, increasingly we're going to start to see people actually accrediting bits of information and trying to make sure that it's not changed. This is it's a very, very fast and very dynamic moving field. And in this year, I think we're going to see that tested probably more than any other year, given the amount of elections that are meant to be taking place.
Marianne, I'll come to you. Huge year election-wise. I mean, it's quite easy to pump out misinformation on platforms like TikTok, Instagram, because people genuinely believe what they see on their devices, don't they?
I think it is easy to do that. And I think Harvard recently did a study where they looked into disinformation and they looked into what TikTok has been trying to do, whereby they are trying to sort of fight against disinformation and provide accurate information. So what they've said, what TikTok has done in the EU is they've got these election centers which are in-app, and they're saying you need to come here for the right information. So the Harvard researchers, they said that if you were to use TikTok's own technologies, particularly the one where you put 2 videos up against each other and you've got a user reacting to another user's video. It used to be done to react to dancers, sing the song, or try and imitate someone. But they're saying you can actually put against that original context of the lie and have somebody debunk it. They said that was quite successful, but only if it was put side by side within the original context of the original lie. It was successful in doing that. Recently, the UK government MPs have warned, they've done a big report, and they've said we need to have more doctors and scientists getting onto the platform, we probably need more journalists, more experts to actually move onto TikTok and provide videos giving accurate information, since so many young people, I believe it's 1 in 10 children, so under 16s, and 71% of 16 to 24-year-olds use TikTok as well as a news website.
Wow. I mean, the figures are incredible, aren't they, Maria?
Yeah.
You know, talk to me about the positives of social media, your experience, how you've built up your profile and what opportunities that has brought you.
I mean, before COVID, there's a lot of people that were able to be self-employed because of social media and work from home, essentially. So that, for me, was definitely a positive. In terms of, obviously, news and reports as well, that is a positive because, sometimes we don't always get to see the information that we get online in mainstream media. And I think that's been, especially now with everything going on, people are really, hot on social media for that reason. And then also, there are definitely positives, accessibility to knowledge. And the reason I kind of battle, though, with that is because I just look at when I grew up in the 90s and I think to myself, well, I feel like I had a great childhood. I feel like, I was always into, random fun facts. Where would I just try to look up, pieces of information? And I would just do it traditionally, a book, family, friends, people around me. So what kind of concerns me is that, yes, all these good elements of social media, are they convenient or are they really necessary in the world that we live in where we've done something innovative that is become the norm? Or is it just something that we're saying is positive because we've become lazier? So that's where I do battle with some of the good points.
Bill, I noticed on TikTok as well, a lot of politicians are moving onto it. People that, you wouldn't really have thought would be TikTok material. Nigel Farage, for example, in the United Kingdom, self-styled Mr. Brexit. Jordan Bardella in France, right-wing, far-right politician, Marine Le Pen's heir. They're heading on to TikTok. Is it to get the young vote? Is that what they're after?
I think these politicians, many of them are masters of misinformation, and they're simply using these platforms in the way that they are far too easy to use in order to amplify this sort of misinformation. The problem that we have is, whilst we have possibly less reputable politicians actually exploiting this vulnerability, we have a lack of backbone from the more reputable politicians actually doing something about it. Now, I've already mentioned age gating, and if Australia can do it, then anyone else can do it, and we could have that enforcement. And all too often we have politicians grandstanding and talking in great laudable terms about how they're going to protect us all and make measures. And we talked earlier about cloud sovereignty. Well, I was previously the cloud strategist at the largest sovereign cloud operation in the UK, and people were not willing to pay extra to actually work with a UK cloud to actually have that sort of sovereign protection. Even the government, who actually should be standing up for British technology and British business, should be actually protecting our data, whether it's our financial data with HMRC, whether it's our health data with the NHS, all of the most sensitive data about us, including criminal record, if any of us here have got one. But that's a sort of information that absolutely has to be kept sovereign, has to be kept private. And yet the government was putting all this information not onto available UK sovereign clouds. They were putting it all onto American cloud firms, which could be trailed by the NSA and that doesn't have the sort of protection. And at the same time, they weren't doing a great deal to hold the social media companies to account. So I think there's a lack of backbone in actually really following through the measures that could actually be applied.
Well, this has been a huge talking point in the United States at the highest level. TikTok is being discussed. Let's have a listen to an exchange between a US senator and the CEO of the company and see what we make of this.
Have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, I'm Singaporean. No.
Have you ever been associated or affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party?
No, Senator. Again, I'm Singaporean.
Peter, do you get the impression there's perhaps a little bit of xenophobia here when it comes to TikTok in the United States and the ownership issue and the fact that it's Chinese being successful and Americans struggling to catch up?
I think there's an element of xenophobia, but I think it's more that politicians are gradually catching up with the value of data and also with the value of people's own technology. I think you've seen for a long time now the Americans suddenly waking up to the fact that the global markets are not exactly the cure that people thought they were. They're seeing that there are vital elements of technology that they want to pull back, like chip production. They're actually thinking now about solar panel production and seeing that as a strategic interest as well as we move into a time of climate change. So I think that what you're doing, I mean, Bill said that there was a lack of backbone. I don't think it's a lack of backbone. It was a lack of understanding. And that's something that we've talked about for ever such a long time now, that there aren't enough politicians that really understand how technology works. I think that you're gradually seeing that understanding starting to come through. I think, to go to Bill's point about that the government didn't want to use UK-based servers. Now, as we're moving to this AI education model that people are beginning to talk about in the Houses of Parliament, people are actually thinking, no, we have a cultural value on our data. That data has to be stored within our own national boundaries because of a need for cultural integrity. I think that you're seeing a lot of issues that people have never, ever, ever thought about with technology. And it's actually part and parcel of the fact that technology is mutating and changing very, very fast. And it's not just drivers like artificial intelligence that are doing that. It's just that the technology itself now changes so quickly that we don't really think about the ramifications of it for a little while until they start to come through.
Marianne, give us your prediction. What will TikTok do? They're faced with a choice now. If the Americans are serious about this, they've got 9 months to sell up and find an acceptable owner for the US business or face a ban. What do you think TikTok will do?
I mean, I think I want to look at what they're already doing. So this month alone, they've already put out a report. They've worked with, so Huawei worked with this economics firm, Oxford Economics, to make a huge report about why you shouldn't be banning Huawei. When we were talking about having to remove the 5G kit from our UK mobile networks. And essentially what they've done is they've done the same thing, and they're trying to target Five Eyes governments, Five Eyes countries, and they've basically said in Australia, we contributed 1.1 billion Australian dollars to your GDP last year, and we are massively helping small businesses with marketing and everything. So I think they're going to continue to go on a massive marketing campaign. I do agree with Bill that there's going to be a huge impact of, there's a lot of things you can do with the legal system. You could continue to fight this out. I think it's going to be up to who wins the election, I think. Will we have Trump back in? Will it be a more Democrat-leaning candidate? I think if it's Trump, he'll definitely be pushing for a ban or some sort of strategic business influence or agreement with China. I think watch this space. I think it would be a huge shame if it were to be banned outright. I think it's much more likely to be sold. Perhaps they will just have to base the poor Singaporean CEO, make him move to Europe or something.
Maria, would we miss TikTok if it wasn't there?
I think young people especially really would. But you know what? There has been surveys done where they've asked young people independently, if there was no such thing as social media, if you weren't allowed to be on social media anymore, how would you feel? And they said, is it just me who's not allowed, or is everyone not allowed anymore? And they said, everyone. And in that case, they were like, yeah, I wouldn't mind not having it, which is really interesting because a lot of the reason I think so many people are on social media is because of the social pressure.
Peer pressure.
Not because it necessarily gives them something, and that should be more closely looked at. Going back to the whole mental health, we touched on that earlier. So,
Bill, what do you think TikTok will do?
I think we're probably going to be moving towards what we're going to have different versions of the internet and social media in different countries. What you shouldn't overlook is the difference in the cultural orientation. In China, we have a separate version of TikTok that is used domestically that had enhanced controls to protect children, to actually interrupt a lot of their viewing, to limit the amount of that they do. Those are actually controls that would be enormously beneficial if done elsewhere.
So it begs the question, why don't they do that in the West?
But that comes to the cultural attitude. Here in the UK, we've recently moved towards a partial ban on smoking because there is an element of nanny state. Well, surely we should be doing the same towards something that's actually having a real impact on our children. In America, at the same time, they can't even impose gun controls, and they're having school shootings. So I actually think we've got massive differences in cultural attitude here. And therefore, whilst the Americans may take a move and may ban TikTok, it doesn't mean that the rest of the world is going to. And I think we're going to have differences across the world based on their cultural acceptance of, you may call it nanny states, you may call it libertarianism, but those are cultural attitudes are actually going to have an important part to play.
Peter, can I ask you, does it make a difference if Trump wins the election again? you've got a guy coming in, a president who actually owns a social media platform himself that he created, Truth Social. How does that kind of play into the whole picture when you've got, you know, a rival social media platform owner actually running the country?
I don't think so. I get the impression now that with a lot of the technology policy, there's an idea that you should have continuous technology policy that's really not influenced that much by changes in political leadership. I think that Trump will, I mean, Truth Social, I don't know how much of a social media channel that really is, and I don't know what its longevity would be without Trump.
Peter, Marianne, Maria and Bill, thank you all so much for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World, and if you like what you see there, please do hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.